At the end of the Cold War, there was lots of hope, lots of expectation that the UN would finally be able to do what it was set up to do. That great power divisions were over. We can get the great powers to agree to do what is right, to give us reasonable mandates and the requisite resources that were needed. And as we saw, peacekeeping operations grew very quickly. I see some of the peacekeepers from Benamie and others in the room, Alvaro de Soto, Lakhdar Brahimi. It grew very quickly, and Benamie, who was head of peacekeeping operations. And we moved very quickly from about 500 peacekeepers to 75,000 in 16 operations. And it was exciting, it was exhilarating, there was hope. There was hope that the UN could do things. And I think we had a good run up to about 2002, after the, just leading to the Iraq War. The Iraq War brought very serious divisions within the membership. It took a long time to heal, and I'm not sure I can say it has fully healed. It brought suspicions and mistrust, which is still with us. And in some senses, it's gotten a bit worse. Not only because of that, but some other subsequent developments. But the UN also at that time realized that they shouldn't just focus on conflicts, and that economic and social issues were extremely important, and that there could be economic basis for conflict. And we were able to get the member states to agree to embrace the Millennium Development Goals, for example, tackling absolute poverty across the world, improving the lives of children and mothers. We were able to get them to take on HIV/AIDS and set up the Global Fund, which has raised billions to help the poor. We were also able to get, the UN was open to bring in others into the fold, civil society and the private sector, opening the doors to them. And I firmly believe, as you've said, that even though the UN is seen as an organization of states, the ideals and the principles it exists to protect and defend belongs to the people. The charter starts with "we the peoples," and we couldn't pretend that they didn't have a role to play in the organization. And as I keep telling my colleagues and the ambassadors, if we are here to serve the peoples are out there, not in the glass house in the building. We needed to go out, reach them, and also make it possible for them to reach us. It was also obvious that public sector alone, the governments cannot tackle all the issues we deserve. And we needed to bring in private sector and work with them in partnership and really open up and challenge them to work with us in resolving some of the issues. So we went through a period of really excitement and hope. That hope has dissipated somehow. The member states who cooperated immediately after the Cold War are now at loggerheads. They can't even agree on a painful, difficult, brutal issue like Syria. They can't agree on how to help the Syrian people. And yet we all know what is happening. And I think we need to bring back hope. We need to find a way of getting these governments to understand that they need to make a common cause. What is interesting is, in the past, we had big powers who thought they had the right to lead and pull all of us along. Today, I don't see a big power that wants to lead. I don't see a big power that wants to show the way, which means that if we are going to tackle any of the big issues confronting us, we need a core group of countries who come together, make a common cause, which is rational, which is sensible, that the broader international community can support and get it done. And I hope we will move in that direction in our efforts to resolve the conflicts in the Middle East and in Africa and in Ukraine. I think I've said enough on that topic. And he keeps calling me SG. For those of you who don't know what that means, it means a scapegoat. We all need a scapegoat.
Well, I will start to the right, and you will come with smarter and easier questions. Three of you on the right. Concise.
Okay. So, my name is Delphine Zamba. I'm a student in public affairs coming from France. So, I've got a question. You are the author, Mr. the former Secretary General, you are the author of a famous report called We the People, the Role of the UN in the 21st Century, also called the Millennium Goals Development, in which you mention values shared by the nation, which are the main purposes for the millennium coming, such as freedom, equity and solidarity, tolerance, nonviolence, respect of nature, and sharing responsibility. Now, my question is, the Millennium Development Goals have been implemented on the 2015 agenda, sorry. Do the nations stick to the implementation schedule? Otherwise, which are the main impediments and international solutions that could be set up to alleviate or solve these inequalities? Thank you.
Thank you. And I know the one just behind you is going to ask the question. Go straight to the question. Go ahead, young man. There's no introduction.
Mr. Annan, thank you for coming. My name is Valentin Weber. I'm from Austria. I'm a dual degree student in international affairs at Sciences Po and the LSE. My question relates to the peace-building architecture, which was created in 2005 upon your urging. In 2015, it is celebrating 10 years of its existence. And a review panel is supposed to publish a report. What is your personal opinion or assessment of the peace-building architecture so far, of its achievements, and where do you see possible improvements? Thank you.
Thank you. Third one.
Good evening, and thank you once again on behalf of all of us for your visit this evening. My question steps aside from the UN and asks of you something else. You're sitting here today.
Closer to the mic.
You're sitting here today in the capacity as well, I suppose, as the founder and chair of the Kofi Annan Foundation, and you recently wrote, "My generation, of course, has to ask itself how we can best support the young in their ambitions, for it is the least that we can do." I'm interested to know what lies in store for the Kofi Annan Foundation in 2015, and in particular for what you've written about for young people. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, I think the target that was set for the Millennium Development Goals have had quite a bit of impact. The Millennium Development Goals has helped lift millions out of poverty, mainly in India, China, Brazil did well. Quite a lot of the other countries have implemented parts of the Millennium Development Goals, but have not fulfilled all the goals. But we can say that today there are more girls in school, mothers are healthier, children under 5 are living, are not dying, and clean drinking water is available to many more people than we had hoped. And in terms of absolute poverty, we have reduced it by 50%. That is no mean achievement, but we have not achieved it all. And the question is why we have not been able to do it. Each country approached it. In Brazil, for example, by reducing inflation drastically, one was able to raise the level of standards for millions of people. In China, the rapid economic growth helped improve their conditions. In other poorer and smaller countries, they couldn't have that sort of broad impact, but they were able to help their people in areas of health, education, clean water, and such. And so I will say that the Millennium Development Goals have been important. For the first time ever that I can remember, we all agreed to a common framework for development, a framework that was accepted by all governments, civil society, and understood by the ordinary person in the street in Delhi, Accra, or Johannesburg. It didn't take a thesis to explain to the mother that the daughter has to go to school, that clean water was important, or to get companies to understand that they don't have to pollute the lake that is producing drinking water for the village. So not all has been achieved, but we have gained a lot. And now, of course, the Secretary General is looking at what they call the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, to follow the Millennium Development Goals when they end in December this year. My own feeling is that the MDGs are the absolute floor that we should help ensure that each citizen receives. And so even if we have not completed or achieved it by 2015, December 2015, we should continue our effort. On the question of Peace Building Commission, one of the people in this room played a very important role in that. That's Lakhdar Brahimi. The Peace Building Commission, some would argue, has not performed the way one expected it to perform. And I think there are several reasons. First of all, you have the question of resources and the question of a mandate given to the UN personnel in a certain country after the conflict. And I think we also have to be honest with ourselves. There is a tendency in the international community to believe that when the killing and the shooting stops, the crisis is over. And sometimes the money and the resources needed for nation building and peace building doesn't follow easily. And in fact, what is even worse is in desperate humanitarian situations, we come together for pledging conferences, we pledge billions, but we don't pay. We get the media, the press say government has promised this and that and that. And to read that, we promised 4 billion plus for a program in Syria, but only 19% has been paid in. What sort of solidarity or international community is that? How do we change that attitude? As Secretary General, the only situation I remember where we got more money than we needed and was the tsunami in Indonesia. And I asked my staff to analyze how come people were so generous. How come we were able to raise so much? I then came to the conclusion that first of all, the tsunami happened on the 26th of December, almost on Christmas Day. A period of the year, a period of giving, a period of generosity, a period of solidarity. And on top of that, it was really an international tragedy. The people who were hit came from about 50 different countries. A Swedish mother may be looking for a 4-year-old child, or a French woman may be looking for a daughter. And in some situations, the collection from the public exceeded what their governments gave us for the crisis. But we have not been able to replicate that since the tsunami, and we cannot organize that. Each crisis happens on Christmas Day for us to get that kind of response. On the Kofi Annan Foundation, where we are trying to help improve the lives of people, we do a lot on governance, on reconciliation, on mediation. I just came from Colombia and Havana, where I was trying to see what I can do to help the negotiations between the Colombian government and FARC. But I think when it comes to our relations with the young people, we do want to engage. We engage them seriously. We take you as the leaders of the 21st century. And I believe intergenerational dialogue is extremely important. My generation has not always succeeded. We've not always done what we should, and I'm not sure we are leaving you a very healthy world, particularly in terms of environment and others, but you're going to take charge. It's your world now, and we need to really engage you and try to encourage you to take responsibility. You don't have to be old to be responsible. You don't have to be old to lead. You yourself should know within you individually when you must lead, when something moves you to act, when something moves you to organize your friends, to take responsibility, to take leadership. And don't hold yourselves back. Sometimes we, the old, will tell you, shut up and listen, you are too young. I think we are doing less and less of that. But you shouldn't always be cowed by that. And so, keep hope and be courageous and ask questions and take action when you think you are right. Thank you.
Three on the left side.
Your Excellency, thank you so much for being here. My name is Alessandra. I'm a first year student in Masters at PSIA, and I'm also the president of the Model UN Society of Sciences Po. So I have a question regarding this weekend's gathering of the heads of the Arab League that have gathered in Sharm el-Sheikh and agreed to create a joint Arab-Sunni anti-Tehran military force. How do you feel about this historical development, and what are implications in your view? Thank you.
The question was, you couldn't hear it.
Get closer to the mic. I can say that.
Apologies. So this weekend, the heads of the Arab League states have gathered together in Sharm el-Sheikh and created this joint force of Sunni joint force anti-Tehran. And my question is, what are the implications of this historical development, and how do you feel about this? Thank you.
Next.
Good evening, Your Excellency, and thank you for being here. My name is Leah Batal. I'm in Master in International Economic Development, International Economic Policy, sorry. And I'm also part of the United Nations Club of Sciences Po. And so I was wondering, concerning the recent victory of Benjamin Netanyahu, how should we interpret it on the international level? Isn't it a reaffirmation of the position of the Israeli population regarding the international law that has not quite been entirely respected until now? So how should we interpret it on the international level? Thank you very much.
Young man.
Good evening, sir, and welcome to Sciences Po. I'm Nelson Kemen, a student in public administration, born the same year as Nelson Mandela was released from prison. My dad has a question for you. We both are from Cameroon, and he wants to know, how does Boko Haram get their weapons, and who are their suppliers? Thanks.
Let me start with a question on the Arab League. This is an issue which has been on the table for quite some time. They've discussed it in the past. But now, given the situation in the region, they seem to have come to an agreement on establishing a force. I think the question is not so much whether they are able to establish the force or not, but how you use the force, what are the ground rules, and how they are deployed. When Yemen exploded, we read about the Saudi Arabians' action with a coalition, and there was a sense that nobody was going to put in ground troops. I'm not sure if by creation this force now, there is some expectation that ground forces could go in there. And if the ground forces do go in, what will be the rules of engagement? And we must also remember that as former head of UN Peacekeeping and Secretary General, and there are many people here who know the issue, we had tended often to be very careful not to allow neighbors to participate in peacekeeping operations. They often have their own history, they come with their own issues, and if you are not careful, it complicates the situation. I recall I was in Kenya in 2008 helping them resolve their conflict when the question of deploying Kenyan troops to Somalia came up. And I recall a conversation I had with several of the ministers. I said, be careful. If you're going to deploy troops to Somalia, who are your neighbors, and you also have your own Kenyan Somali population, so you have Kenyan Somalis and Somali. If the population gets pumped up against Somalis and they begin attacking them, which Somalis are you attacking? The local Somalis or the other? And you can create divisions amongst your own society. And to some extent, that has happened. And so when you have a sort of a force of that nature, the rules of engagement and deployment becomes important. Would you deploy immediate neighbors? Or would you go further afield to bring the troops? And so there are lots of questions there, and I really believe it's too early for me to comment on what would happen and what impact the forces would have. On the question of Prime Minister Netanyahu, is an interesting question you pose. Obviously, during the campaign, he indicated that he wasn't interested in two-state solution. And that clarity is perhaps helpful. He's pulled back since the election, but I think he did make that statement and it's out there. And this is something that not only him, but the Israeli population would need to think through very carefully. They have two choices. Either you accept the two-state solution or insist that you're not going to have the two states and you have one state. You can have, they are also talking of a democratic Jewish state. You can have a smaller democratic state, or you can insist on a larger state that embraces Arab population that will constantly fight for its rights and have tensions in society. In fact, interestingly enough, one of my conversations Gaddafi, a former Libyan leader, Gaddafi had with me, he said, I have a solution for Israel. I think you guys should forget the two-state solution and have one state, call it Israel-teen, and have them all live together. And in 20, 25 years' time, we'll see who has a majority, was his attitude. And this is really an issue the Israelis have to think about. But you also raise a question of international law. And here I think we are dealing with the question of occupation and what the international community should do. And I think this would also come to the fore if indeed the position is we do not want a two-state solution, we are not going to negotiate. That becomes a real urgent issue. On the question of Boko Haram, I think it's fascinating to see the countries in the region finally coming together to fight Boko Haram, although there are reports that South African mercenaries are also involved. The group that fought in Sierra Leone, the executive's outcome, they were much younger than dynamic, agile. I'm told now they're about 50, 60-year-old mercenaries, but apparently they are still equally effective. But in any event, the Nigerian government seems in the last 6 weeks or so to have taken the fight to Boko Haram with the support of Chad, Cameroon, and Niger. And I hope that effort will continue. And what is unfortunate is that we waited so long to take on Boko Haram and allow them room to do the damage that they have done. Thanks.
One floor up.
Okay. Good evening. Thank you for being here tonight at Sciences Po, first of all. My name is Christine Avenar. I'm studying public administration at Sciences Po. I'm a French student. And my question is also related to Yemen. Sorry, I hope it's going to be different. My question is, I would like to know your opinion as regard to the UN position, the UN position in Yemen and the current situation in Yemen. And I would also want to know what is your opinion as regards to the implication from a religious perspective in the whole Middle East. Thank you.
Young man.
Good evening. I'm Alex, I'm a French student, and my question is whether you still think it is possible to have a meaningful reform of the UN Charter, and if yes, what do you think is the likeliest path to that reform and what are the obstacles? Thank you.
Mademoiselle.
Good evening, my name is Yu Ting. I'm an exchange student from Canada studying economics. We have one of the largest freshwater supplies in the world in Canada. And I was wondering, as global demand in the population for water increases, how do you see the international dynamic changing between the haves and the have-nots of freshwater? Thank you.
I think the situation in Yemen is becoming more and more complex. Obviously, we've talked about the military action and whether ground troops would also be sent in. Attempts have been made to mediate, and I think Benoma has been doing, quite a good job. But it's a very tough and a difficult situation. And what has been under the table is now firmly put on the table, where at the conference in Sharm el-Sheikh, the question of role of Iran and role of Saudi Arabia came up. Obviously, in Sharm el-Sheikh, they focused on the role of Iran, not so much on the other side. And this is an issue that covers the whole region from Syria to Iraq to Yemen.